The leather-bound manuscript felt wrong in my hands from the moment I touched it. Not physically wrong. The binding was pristine, the pages intact despite their age, but wrong in a way that made my archival instincts scream. 23 years of handling royal documents had taught me to trust those instincts, and they had never led me astray until now. I found it during my routine inventory of Section 7B, wedged between two unremarkable tax records from the 16th century. The manuscript bore no catalog number, no classification stamp, nothing to indicate it had ever been properly processed. In the Royal Archives, where every document was meticulously tracked since its founding in 1547, this was more than unusual. It was impossible. The evening shadows had begun their usual dance across the stone walls of my basement office as I placed the book on my desk. The brass nameplate caught the dying sunlight filtering through the narrow window. Gerald Blackwood, Chief Archivist. A title I'd worked my entire life to earn, following in the footsteps of generations of Blackwoods who had served as keepers of the kingdom's secrets. The ancient oak desk, worn smooth by centuries of use, creaked under the manuscript's weight. Around me, the familiar sense of leather, parchment, and preservation chemicals mingled with something else. Something that didn't belong in these hallowed halls. A metallic tang that reminded me of copper, or perhaps something darker. Protocol dictated I should immediately report unregistered documents to the Archive Security Council. It was a rule I had enforced countless times during my tenure, dismissing 2 junior archivists just last year for failing to follow proper documentation procedures. Yet my hands moved of their own accord, opening the cover with practiced care. The parchment crackled, its sound echoing in the silence of my office like distant gunfire. The first page bore a single line in ancient script. To the one who finds this record, some truths are better left buried. My breath caught in my throat. The handwriting was unmistakable. I'd spent years studying it in countless official documents. This was penned by Archbishop Edmund Blackwood, my ancestor who served as the first royal archivist in 1547. His personal papers were supposed to have been destroyed in the Great Fire of 1642, a tragedy that claimed not only documents but the lives of 3 archivists who tried to save them. Thunder rumbled outside, though the weather report had promised clear skies. The sound seemed to reverberate through the ancient stonework, making the flames of my desk candles dance. I had always preferred their light to the harsh fluorescent overheads, a preference that now felt less like tradition and more like preservation of sanity. My fingers trembled slightly as I began to translate the first passage. In the year of our Lord 1547, I witnessed events that shall forever haunt these halls. What follows is my testimony of the true founding of our monarchy, and the price paid in blood and darkness to establish the crown. I write this knowing full well that my words, should they ever be discovered, may cost my life and the lives of those who read them. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, heart pounding against my ribs, but the shadows revealed nothing. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of eyes boring into the back of my skull. The manuscript seemed to pulse with dark possibility on my desk, daring me to continue, promising secrets that could reshape or destroy everything I thought I knew about our kingdom's history. I glanced at the security camera in the corner. Its red light was off. Strange. The system was designed to operate continuously, with backup power supplies ensuring uninterrupted surveillance. Making a mental note to report the malfunction, I returned to the text, my curiosity overwhelming my growing sense of unease. The next paragraphs described ritual chambers beneath the palace, ceremonies performed in dead languages, and sacrifices made to ensure 3 centuries of unbroken royal succession. My hands trembled as I recognized connections to current events. The mysterious illness affecting the crown prince, the strange symbols appearing on palace walls, the disappearance of 3 archival assistants in the past month. Each revelation seemed to drop the temperature in my office by another degree. The sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor outside my office. At this hour, 9:47 p.m. according to my antique desk clock, I should have been alone in the archives. The night guard, Thomas, didn't make his rounds until midnight. I quickly slipped the manuscript into my leather briefcase, my mind racing. Protocol be damned. This needed to be translated somewhere private, somewhere safe. As I reached for my coat, my computer chimed with an incoming email. The subject line froze me in place. Unauthorized access to restricted documents. Immediate action required. The footsteps grew closer, measured and deliberate. They didn't sound like Thomas's familiar heavy tread. I had seconds to decide. Follow protocol and surrender the manuscript, or take it and face the consequences. The weight of centuries pressed down on me as I stood in that moment of choice, while outside my office, something that pretended to be human approached with terrible purpose. Through the frosted glass of my office door, a shadow began to take shape. I didn't wait to see what cast that shadow. Grabbing my briefcase, I moved swiftly to the concealed door behind my filing cabinet. A remnant from when the archive served as a wartime bunker. Few knew of its existence. Fewer still knew of the network of maintenance tunnels it connected to beneath the palace. The door's hinges protested softly as I slipped through, closing it behind me just as my office door opened. Through the thin wall, I heard footsteps enter my office, followed by a voice that made my blood run cold. "Search everything. The manuscript must be recovered." The voice belonged to Lord Chancellor Harrison, but something was wrong with it. A hollow quality that reminded me of wind through empty rooms. He cannot be allowed to translate it further. I pressed myself against the damp stone wall, hardly daring to breathe. The maintenance tunnel stretched before me, illuminated only by emergency lights that cast sickly green shadows every 20 feet. The air was thick with the smell of old water and something else, the same metallic scent that had clung to the manuscript. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Another email. Final warning. Return to archives. Immediately. Security Protocol 7. Initiated. Security Protocol 7. In 23 years, it had only been initiated once. The night 3 researchers disappeared while investigating historical records of royal succession ceremonies. Their bodies were never found, but I remembered the strange marks on the archive floor the next morning, like something had been dragged away. I began moving deeper into the tunnels, my footsteps echoing despite my best efforts at silence. The briefcase felt heavier with each step, as if the manuscript inside was gaining mass. My mind raced through the fragments I'd managed to translate. Ritual chambers, sacrifices, 3 centuries of unbroken succession. The current crown prince's mysterious illness had started 3 months ago, exactly 3 centuries after the last unexplained royal death. The tunnel branched ahead. Left led toward the palace proper, right toward the old cathedral crypt. I hesitated, remembering another passage from the manuscript. The truth lies beneath God's house, where the first price was paid. A distant sound made the decision for me. Footsteps, multiple sets, echoing from the left tunnel. I turned right, moving faster now. The emergency lights grew further apart, leaving longer stretches of darkness between them. In one such stretch, my foot caught on something. A loose stone? And I stumbled, catching myself against the wall. My hand came away wet. In the next light's glow, I saw it wasn't water staining my palm, but something darker, fresher. The wall beside me bore a handprint, not yet dry. Someone had come this way recently. Someone who was bleeding. The vibration of my phone made me jump. Not an email this time, but a text from an unknown number. "You're going the right way, Gerald. Keep following the marks. Time is shorter than you think." The message was signed with a single initial. E. Edmund? Impossible. Yet the handwriting in the manuscript, the timing of its discovery, the current crisis with the crown prince, nothing about this felt like coincidence. A new sound echoed through the tunnel. Chanting, so faint I might have imagined it. The words were in no language I recognized, but they made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The manuscript in my briefcase seemed to pulse in rhythm with them. I checked my watch, 10:13 p.m. The Crown Prince's physicians had announced he would undergo an emergency procedure at midnight. The timing nagged at something in my memory, something from the manuscript about ceremonies performed when night is highest and the veil thinnest. The chanting grew louder as I approached another junction. The right path continued toward the cathedral. while the left descended sharply via ancient stone steps. The air coming from the left carried that metallic scent again, stronger now, along with the sound of running water. My phone lit up with another text. Choose wisely, Archivist. Some paths can only be walked once. The footsteps behind me had grown closer. A faint light bobbed in the darkness I'd left behind. Flashlights, moving fast. Soon they would reach the junction where I'd found the bloodied handprint. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and with it came a sound I'd never forget. Something between a scream and a song, echoing up from the descending passage. It carried with it the weight of centuries, the price of power, and the promise of answers. I took one step toward the cathedral, then stopped. The manuscript hadn't found its way to me by accident. I was a Blackwood, and Blackwoods had served as keepers of royal secrets since the beginning, since the first price was paid. The lights behind me grew brighter. I had seconds to choose. The safe path to the cathedral above, or the dark descent that might lead to truth. The manuscript pulsed once more, and I made my choice. The steps down seemed endless. Each one took me further from the world I knew, into depths where the palace's foundations met something older, something that predated written history. The chanting grew clearer, though no more comprehensible, rising and falling in patterns that made my head swim. Water trickled down the walls, but it moved wrong, sometimes flowing upward, defying gravity. My phone had lost signal 20 steps down, its screen now showing only static and random sequences of numbers. The last message from E remained visible. What you're about to witness has happened before. The cycle must be broken. The manuscript in my briefcase had grown impossibly heavy, as if it contained more than just paper and ink. Each step down sent vibrations through the leather, matching the rhythm of the chanting below. I had to stop twice to catch my breath, my legs trembling from the weight. After what felt like hours, but couldn't have been more than 30 minutes, the stairs ended at a vast, circular chamber. The sight stopped me cold. This wasn't just some forgotten basement. This was architecture that shouldn't exist beneath a modern palace. Massive columns rose into darkness, their surfaces covered in spiraling text that seemed to move when viewed directly. In the center of the chamber stood an altar of black stone, its surface stained with centuries of use. Surrounding it were 13 hooded figures, their robes bearing the same symbols I'd seen appearing on palace walls. They hadn't noticed me yet, focused on their chanting and something that lay on the altar. I pressed myself against one of the columns, finally daring to open the manuscript. The pages fell open to a detailed drawing of this very chamber, dated 1547. The accompanying text made my throat constrict. The price of power is not paid once, but renewed each 3rd century. A willing vessel of royal blood must be prepared, their essence used to feed what dwells between worlds. The crown's power flows from this sacrifice, but with each renewal, the hunger grows stronger. A willing vessel. The crown prince's illness. The emergency procedure scheduled for midnight. One of the hooded figures spoke, their voice carrying the same hollow quality I'd heard from the Lord Chancellor. The hour approaches. The vessel must be prepared. They parted, revealing what lay on the altar. The crown prince himself, conscious but unable to move, his eyes wide with terror. Beside him sat a familiar golden chalice, the same one used in every coronation ceremony since the monarchy's founding. My hands shook as I turned to the next page of the manuscript, where Edmund's handwriting grew frantic. I thought I could bear the weight of this knowledge, but I cannot. There is another way, a ritual of undoing, but it requires one of the original bloodlines. A Blackwood. The words are... The rest of the page was torn away. A drop of water fell on the manuscript, but when I touched it, my fingers came away red. Blood was seeping from between the pages, staining my hands. The chanting reached a crescendo, and I felt something vast and ancient turn its attention toward me. The archivist has joined us, the Lord Chancellor's voice echoed. How fitting. A Blackwood was there at the beginning. Another should witness the renewal. The hooded figures turned as one, their faces hidden in supernatural shadow. But what struck me most was their hands, gray, desiccated things that hadn't been human for centuries. Your ancestor chose duty over truth, the Chancellor continued. The question is, what will you choose? The Crown Prince's eyes met mine, silently pleading. The manuscript burned in my hands, its pages now dripping steadily with blood. I knew the ritual words were hidden somewhere in its pages, the means to end this centuries-old cycle of sacrifice. But I also knew what breaking such ancient bonds might mean. The monarchy's power wasn't just political. It was a seal, holding something back. If I broke it, what would be released? The chamber's shadows deepened, coalescing into shapes that hurt to look at. The air grew thick with the smell of copper and decay. Midnight was approaching, and with it, a choice that would reshape history. The vessel or the book, archivist? The Chancellor's voice had grown multiple overtones, as if many voices spoke through him. Choose quickly. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. I looked at the prince, the manuscript, the ancient horror pressing against the edges of reality, and understood at last why Edmund had hidden his writings. Some choices are too terrible to pass on. The first bell of midnight began to toll above. The second bell tolled as I made my decision. With trembling hands, I opened the manuscript to its center, where the pages were heaviest with blood. The hooded figures tensed, their dried husk hands raising in unison. "Stop him," the Chancellor commanded, but his voice faltered as I began to read. The words weren't in any language I knew, yet they flowed from my lips as naturally as breathing. Each syllable sent ripples through the chamber's shadows, making the ancient columns shudder. The Crown Prince's eyes widened as the invisible bonds holding him began to weaken. But it was the Chancellor's reaction that confirmed I'd made the right choice. His hood fell back, revealing a face that flickered between human and something else. Something that had worn countless faces over centuries. "Fool!" The thing wearing Harrison's shape snarled. "You don't understand what you're undoing. The price was negotiated in blood and power. Breaking it will destroy everything." The third bell tolled. A memory surfaced, not mine, but Edmund's, somehow transferred through the manuscript's bloody pages. I saw him standing in this same chamber, watching the first sacrifice, understanding too late what the crown had bargained with. The horror of that memory unlocked something in my mind. "The price was a lie," I said, my voice steady despite my fear. "There was never any need for sacrifice. You created the cycle to feed yourself, using our monarchy as a shield." The fourth bell rang out. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Clever Blackwood, just like your ancestor. But he chose wisdom over truth. The monarchy exists because of our bargain. Break it, and you break the foundation of your entire kingdom." "No," I countered, understanding flowing through me with each drop of blood from the manuscript. "The monarchy exists because people believe in it. You just parasited that belief, twisted it into something that could feed you." The fifth bell sounded. The Crown Prince managed to turn his head. "Gerald," he whispered, "the chalice. It's the anchor. It has to be." The sixth bell was cut short as the chamber shook. The hooded figures began to dissolve, revealing themselves as mere projections, puppets of the thing that had posed as Chancellor. I continued reading, each word burning my throat. The manuscript's pages turned on their own, revealing text that hadn't been there before. Edmund's hidden message, written in blood and time. The seventh bell tolled distantly. "Even if you're right," the creature's voice had lost its human pretense, becoming a symphony of screams. "What makes you think you can survive breaking a bond this old? Your ancestor couldn't do it. He tried, and I showed him what happens to those who defy powers older than time." The eighth bell. But Edmund had survived. He'd done something else, not breaking the bond, but changing it. The evidence was in my hands, written in blood that had waited centuries to be read. The ninth bell rang as understanding hit me. The manuscript wasn't just a record. It was a key. And I wasn't just reading it. I was completing a ritual Edmund had started centuries ago. The 10th bell sounded like a scream. "You'll doom everything," the creature howled, its form expanding to fill the chamber's shadows. The monarchy, the kingdom, your precious archives, all will fall. The 11th bell was almost lost in the chaos. The crown prince had managed to sit up, his hand reaching for the chalice. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw generations of royal blood, of sacrifices and secrets, of power built on darkness. The final bell began to toll. In that moment of truth, as midnight struck, and powers ancient and terrible pressed against reality's walls, I understood the true choice before me. This wasn't about saving the monarchy or breaking a curse. It was about something far simpler and far harder. The manuscript's final page began to burn with blue fire, revealing words that had waited 5 centuries to be read. What I saw there changed everything I thought I knew about our history, about Edmund's choice, about the true power behind the throne. The 12th bell faded into silence, and in that silence, I spoke the final words, knowing they would either save us all or doom us completely. The words that emerged from my lips weren't just sounds. They were keys turning in ancient locks, breaking seals that had held for centuries. Each syllable felt like swallowing fire, but I couldn't stop. The manuscript's pages turned to ash in my hands, releasing not smoke, but memories. Hundreds of them, all belonging to Edmund. I saw the truth he'd discovered, the horror that had driven him to create this elaborate plan spanning centuries. The creature before us wasn't some demon or ancient god. It was something far worse, a parasite of belief, feeding on the faith people placed in institutions and power. The crown prince moved with sudden purpose, grasping the chalice. "The vessel accepts the price," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of generations. Blood began to flow from his palm into the ancient cup, but this time it was freely given, not taken. The creature's form writhed, its shadows trying to maintain cohesion. "You cannot rewrite the terms," it shrieked. "The bargain is bound in blood and darkness." But Edmund's memories showed me otherwise. The original bargain had never been with the creature. It had merely inserted itself into a moment of vulnerability, like a virus infecting a wound. The true power had always been in the belief of the people, in the willing sacrifice of rulers who put their kingdom before themselves. The chamber's architecture began to shift, the columns twisting like living things. Ancient symbols flared with light, revealing their true meaning, not words of binding, but of witness. This place wasn't built to contain power, but to observe its transfer. "I understand now," the prince said, standing despite his weakness. "The illness wasn't your doing. It was the old magic responding to truth finally surfacing, showing us it was time." More memories flooded through me. Edmund performing the first part of this ritual in secret, encoding the truth in a manuscript that would find its way to the right hands at the right moment. He hadn't failed. He'd planted the seeds of this very moment. The creature's form began to fragment, its influence weakening as the truth of its parasitic nature became clear. But its voice still carried power. "If you do this, the monarchy will never be the same. The power that holds this kingdom together will fade." "No," I countered, understanding flowing through me. "The power will change. Return to what it should have been. Clean, clear, born of choice and service rather than fear and blood." The prince raised the chalice, now full of his freely given blood. "The crown accepts this change," he declared. "The old price is rejected. We offer instead the price of truth. To rule in light rather than shadow. To serve rather than command." The creature made one last attempt, launching itself toward the prince. But the blood in the chalice began to glow with an inner light, not the sickly green of the emergency lamps above, but something pure and clear. I spoke the final words of Edmund's ritual, my voice joining with the prince's. "The price is not paid to you but to the people. The power flows not from darkness, but from choice. The crown serves the kingdom, not the other way around." The chamber erupted in light so bright it burned away all shadow. The creature's scream became 1,000 whispers, then silence. When my vision cleared, the chamber had transformed. The stains on the altar were gone, the threatening symbols replaced by words of service and protection. But we weren't finished. The prince's blood still glowed in the chalice, and the air hummed with potential. The old bargain was broken, but something had to take its place. Nature abhors a vacuum, and power even more so. "There's more, isn't there?" the prince asked, looking at me with understanding. "Breaking the old bond was only half the ritual. Now we have to create something new." I nodded, feeling the weight of Edmund's final memory. The most important part of his plan, the part he'd died protecting. "The next part," I said, "will change everything." The prince smiled, tired but determined. "Good," he said. "It's about time." Above us, the palace began to wake. Soon, everyone would know something had changed. The question was, were we ready for what would come next? The chalice pulsed with light, waiting for our decision. The choice before us was both simple and impossible. The chalice's light pulsed in rhythm with our heartbeats, waiting for the words that would reshape centuries of power. Through Edmund's memories, I knew what had to be done. But knowing and doing are very different things. "The ritual requires 3 elements," I explained, my voice echoing in the transformed chamber. "Blood freely given, truth freely spoken, and power freely shared. You've provided the first, I've revealed the second. But the third requires both of us," the prince finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. "And everyone above, the entire kingdom." I nodded, feeling the weight of Edmund's final memory. The old power was concentrated, focused through the crown, and corrupted by that thing's influence. The new power must be distributed, shared among all who choose to bear its weight. The chamber's transformed architecture seemed to lean in, listening. The morning light was beginning to filter down through newly revealed shafts in the ceiling. This place had never been meant to dwell in darkness. "Tell me what to do," the prince said, holding the glowing chalice steady. The words came to me, not from the manuscript's ashes but from something deeper, the same source that had guided Edmund centuries ago. "Speak your true name and your choice." He straightened, every inch a ruler, but not in the old way of dominance and fear. "I am Thomas James William Edward, Crown Prince of this realm, and I choose to transform the power of the crown into a shared trust with all who would bear its responsibility." The chalice's light intensified. Above us, bells began to ring. Not the midnight tolling of before, but the clear morning bells that had announced every major royal event for centuries. I spoke next, completing the pattern. "I am Gerald Edmund Blackwood, keeper of records and truth, and I choose to break the seals of secrecy, to let knowledge flow freely among all who would learn." The chamber filled with a sound like distant singing, thousands of voices joining together in unconscious harmony. The prince's blood in the chalice began to rise, defying gravity, forming intricate patterns in the air. "The choice spreads," I said, watching the patterns expand. "Everyone in the kingdom will feel it, even if they don't understand it yet. They'll have to decide, accept a share of responsibility and power, or continue as before." The prince smiled. "They'll choose well. People usually do when given truth and trust instead of lies and fear." The patterns of blood began to disperse, turning to light as they spread outward and upward. Through the chamber's new windows, we could see it reaching the palace above, spreading further into the city beyond. I felt it when the change took hold, a shift in the very foundation of reality. The old hierarchies of power didn't collapse. They transformed, becoming channels for something new, something better. The prince set down the now empty chalice. "It will take time," he said. "Generations, maybe, to fully understand what we've done here." "Edmund knew that," I replied, understanding at last why he'd planned across centuries, rather than trying to force change in his own time. Some changes have to grow naturally, like trees reaching for light. The chamber gave one final shudder and settled into its new configuration. No longer a place of sacrifice and darkness, but a hall of witness and memory. The truth of what happened here would be preserved, not hidden. As we climbed the stairs back to the world above, I thought about the choices that had brought us here. Edmund's choice to plant the seeds of change. The prince's choice to trust and transform rather than cling to corrupt power. My choice to speak truth rather than preserve comfortable lies. But most importantly, I thought about the choices being made right now, as dawn broke over a kingdom awakening to new possibilities. Every person who felt the change would have to decide, accept the responsibility of shared power, or turn away from it. The prince paused at the top of the stairs. What do we tell them? The truth, I said simply. All of it. That's the price we chose to pay, and the gift we chose to give. He nodded, and together we stepped into the morning light. Above us, the bells continued to ring, calling people not to witness a spectacle of power, but to participate in its transformation. The old archives would need to be reorganized, the histories rewritten to include what had been hidden. But that was tomorrow's work. For now, we watched the sunrise paint the palace gold, marking the first morning of something new. The manuscript's ashes still clung to my hands, not as a burden now, but as a reminder. Some prices are too heavy to be paid alone. Some powers are too important to be held by few. Some truths have to be shared no matter the cost. And some changes, once begun, can never be undone. The dawn broke fully over the kingdom, and with it came the first day of a new age, one built not on sacrifice and shadow, but on choice and shared light.